Are you okay? Did you burn yourself? That smells good.
Hello,
Hi there.
how are you?
I'm almost better. Thank you. I've had a terrible cold.
Cold?
Yeah, Easter with the granddaughters. Wonderful time. But they were all sniffly and coffee, and
Yeah.
apparently I lost all my immunity.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm well. No complaints. Busy. I didn't realize I would get this busy. You know, you're sort of lulled into thinking that it's not too busy with kids in the pandemic, and now the activities and
Yeah.
spring, it's crazy.
I know what you mean. Well, it's great to have you at one of these meetings. Yay. And early to boot. That's good.
Yeah, I put the kids in front of a movie, Zootopia. Hopefully it keeps them gripped.
I think it's a spellbinder.
They've seen it once, so.
Once is not enough with a great animated film. There's Peter.
Good evening.
Hi, Peter.
How is everyone?
Well,
Tail end of a cold.
Better than the fore end of the cold, I guess.
Oh, man, it was terrible for a few days. But happily, not the flu du jour, not the COVID. My doctor said if it makes you feel any better, there are hundreds of other coronaviruses that give people common colds. I said, oh, that's great.
did you ever end up getting COVID?
Not as far as I know. Is it still available?
Oh, yeah.
You should have had the variety we had. Everybody got it. Nothing too bad.
That's what my granddaughters did. Everybody in the house got tested positive and nobody was particularly sick.
Yeah.
Good evening, Ron, Olga.
Hi,
How are things at the
Afternoon.
Hayes King household? Silent. Who besides me was at town meeting? Ron, I know you were. I saw you. And Olga was. Peter, did you attend?
For a while.
Would be nice if they offered refreshments at town meeting, I'm thinking. Some sort of snacks.
Yeah, something COVID safe.
They'll probably try to sell it.
No?
Well, we could raffle off a tour of the water treatment plant.
The sewage treatment plant would be more.
Yeah, that would definitely attract the younger kids.
Yeah.
See where your poop goes.
Well, the graphics were good, I thought.
Yes, that was a step up, wasn't it?
Interesting.
And the voting machine basically worked, which is the first time I've seen that happen.
I'm impressed. Now, if we can do it from home, it'd be even better.
I just got a note from the town clerk that the room 7 is now available for hybrid meetings for all boards and commissions. Here's an interesting but a little known fact. This week is National Water Week.
Oh, I'm
I know.
impressed.
Who knew? And apparently next week is oops. Next week is National Drinking Water Week.
Oh.
And
When's National Drinking Week?
no, Drinking Water Week.
Oh, okay. What I heard you say that.
I think most weeks are drinking week.
I see.
Good evening, Sue and Chuck.
Hi, Steve.
I'm
How you
going to-
feeling?
Oh, tip top. I just break down coughing from time to time. I'm going to make you a co-host
Okay, cool.
with all the powers and responsibilities attendant there too.
Excellent.
But
Did
remember,
you
we're
happen did you happen to see my email about maybe making mention to everybody that their email is public record?
yes, but now I don't have to. I was curious, do you know if chat amongst us is also public record?
I do not know, and I will find out.
Okay. I assume we can talk at the water cooler without being recorded and
Yes, that should be
put on public
fine.
record. Is there still a water cooler at Town Hall?
We are switching to the Stony Brook water system. It has been installed for the last, I don't know, week or so, and everybody seems to like it, and it's cheaper than what we've been doing and better for the environment. So I think we're
Yes.
gonna switch.
And it's a local business, Tim Brown's pride and joy. Well, so far hi, good evening, Jeff. So far, the switch to 6:30 has not improved attendance, but there could be many other factors. Like the fact that it's not 39 degrees outside. So it is now 6:30, but I'm going to pause for a minute or two. It's been an influx in the last 60 seconds. See what happens.
Steve, this is Tom Keo. Am I unmuted?
You are, we hear you. 5 by 5.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are you lucky enough to be in some beautiful woodland place?
No, I'm not that lucky. I just don't have accessibility right this evening.
Understood.
I'm in a beautiful place called 20 Lincoln Street.
Yes, that'll do. Well, I've learned by now that the single name John is actually John Round, and that's excellent. But we have someone coming in who called iPhone. Anybody know who that might be?
I don't. Do we take our
Well.
chances?
Let's find out.
I'm on an iPhone.
I think
Just
many of
Peter.
us are, but
Yeah.
you can do it by process of elimination. There's Mr. Carvalho on the road. Excellent. Helen is here.
Oh, Ashley's here. Hi, Ashley.
Ashley was actually the first to attend. So could the person also known as iPhone on Zoom here identify yourself?
They might not know they entered as iPhone.
That's true. Especially if they're not looking at a screen.
Right.
Well, that's a bit of a conundrum, but we're going to begin the meeting anyway. Welcome to the 4th regular meeting of the Water Resource Task Force. I'm Steve Gang, and we have a cast of hundreds joining us, including some hardworking town employees. Sue Croft, Chuck Dam, I think Nate DeRozier is here, and Sue Brown. Forgive me if I left anybody out. The rest of us are volunteers. I guess we're all in that state. Our agenda for this evening was on the web. This meeting is being conducted virtually, although apparently we are now empowered to hold hybrid meetings in room 7. And when we come toward the end of the meeting to pick a date for our next session, we'll discuss whether or not to take advantage of that. I should also remind everyone that all of your email communications between or among any of us are on public record. So act accordingly. And I have, when I was reminded of that, I asked whether our chat would also be part of public record. And we'll find that out soon.
I will.
No one knows the answer, unless there's somebody here who actually knows the answer. Okay, stay tuned for that. Okay, any other preliminary business administration, anything from you, Sue, before we plunge in?
Nope.
That's great. We have two Sues who can say yes and no. Wonderful. Thank you. And they're right next to each other on my screen. What's the collective noun for a collection of Sues?
I wish I had some little funny thing to say to that, but I don't. Maybe Sue Brown does.
A swizzle of Sues.
There you go.
All right, so our first step is on the agenda is to review the report that I believe came from CDM Smith about planning for PFAS outcomes. And I think for that, we'll ask Chuck, if you wouldn't mind, to update us.
Sure. So I assume the letter was circulated, Sue Croft, that you sent it to the entire group, or am I enlightening people for the first time?
I believe I sent around the report to everyone.
Okay. So I don't know, who had a chance to dive into the light reading of PFAS, but it's a pretty thorough report, I would say. We did do, some water sampling, and, they were able to review all of our, lab results and, so on and so forth, and speak to a couple vendors. And, the long and the short of it is that, and we continue to monitor PFAS monthly at the well. We've been still testing or sending our split samples to 2 different labs for the monthly sampling. They continue to have, roughly the same spread of results, meaning that one lab is testing higher than the other consistently. But both labs have been pretty much under the MCL, although we did have one result that was above the MCL, like 20.07 or something like that. So right at the 20 parts per trillion threshold. So, getting back to the report side of things, essentially what we found is that, we have the PFAS. We are going to be able to treat it. There was laid out a few different methods and vendors that could provide the different medias or processes for treating it. The kind of one reason that the price tag skyrockets is that to treat the PFAS, and basically what we're going to likely have to do is filter it through a granular activated carbon filter. Prior to sending the water through that filter, we need to remove the iron and manganese, and there's a lot of iron and manganese in our water. So we basically need 2 separate vessels for that process. So that kind of almost doubles the price for us to treat our PFAS. Is we have to treat the iron and manganese first. Now, it does make it twice as expensive, but it does also improve other aspects of our water quality, namely removing iron and manganese. So, sometimes we get complaints, and if you're in town now or Flushing, you get kind of that dirty water. That's iron and manganese, and it's building up on the walls of our pipes. And when we flush, we're flushing the majority of it out the hydrant, but it's also stirs things up in the system, and that's what you're looking at. So, if we do end up going forward with PFAS treatment for whatever reason, we will also be treating for the iron and manganese. Beyond that, if you've seen it, the price kind of, and it's certainly a preliminary kind of cost. But then they also laid out a drawing, but we don't have room, as you all saw if you took the tour, inside the existing building. So basically what we would end up doing is demoing the older building that houses the well casing itself, and then adding a, kind of an L shape to that, or, a larger area behind the, chemical feed building that we would end up putting those filter vessels in, as well as a backwash tank and system. So, that's why the price goes up, or another reason why the price goes up. I think those are the highlights. Nate, am I forgetting anything? But that's generally what we're looking at. Anion Exchange is another kind of treatment method that was laid out in there. I think the idea is that the GAC will work better and it's cheaper and kind of more common. And also we have the ability to get rid of the residuals easier by sending that media back to the manufacturer. So there's other kind of thought processes at play, but and other kind of considerations besides just the treatment of the PFAS. But in general, I think the next steps would be to do a actual pilot / bench scale testing on our water. So, they could either roll up a trailer mounted unit and put it in the driveway and, send the water through that, and, basically set it off the lab and see the results and make sure that, our specific chains of PFAS will be removed by the various medias, and which one might be more effective or have a, secondary benefit that we might not have considered otherwise. And then we would go forward with after that bench scale testing and getting those results, we would basically move forward with the construction process. In my opinion, it kind of remains to be seen right now where we're going to end up, if we'll be forced in the short term to treat for the PFAS, or if we'll wait and, if we wait, maybe our trends go up and we end up having to treat for it by triggering the MCL, or perhaps, in the next 4 or 5 years, there's a idea that DEP could either lower the threshold or add the currently unregulated PFAS to the treatment process, that add those to the MCL. So kind of another way of getting the same result where more people would be above the MCL and need to treat. So that's kind of where we are. Or, the town could elect to be proactive in, treating this and just decide that we don't want it in the water no matter what. And, we'll move forward with, more testing and eventually construction. But I think it kind of remains to be seen at this point. It's probably a question that the select board or this task force will need to grapple with and answer. Because, like I said, in the very short term, unless we trigger the MCL, there's really no need. And certainly we don't have an appropriation currently, or, it's not figured in the rates to treat for it. So I see Ann Harrison's hand.
Thank you. Yes, questions, Ann, please.
In reading your report, I was surprised to see that the recommended the backflush residue go to the sewer line. And I know you know that very well, and could you explain to us why that's a perfectly good idea? Thank you.
So I think the idea is, for the most part, the PFAS will be basically stick to the media. So the backwash is, we will have to backwash both. We'll have to backwash the green sand media that's filtering out the iron and manganese, and then we'll backwash the GAC that will, contain the PFAS. And I guess my understanding is that the PFAS will stick to the GAC, and then that gets shipped back to the, after it gets to the end of its cycle life, and a certain number of backwashes, we'll still be monitoring for breakthrough. So if we see PFAS breakthrough and, be sent to the distribution system, at a higher rate, or, above the MCL, certainly, then we would basically say that that media is spent, and it would be taken out of the vessel and sent back to the manufacturer, and then they have to deal with it, which I'm not sure if they dispose of it, or if they are able to regenerate it, or if they have another process for removing it. But in
Yeah,
general, that's what will happen.
There's both essentially. It's, goes into the O&M costs, so we're going to be changing media out, every 8-ish or so months, and a lot of that will be dictated upon the pilot testing. But that's certainly going to be a cost we're going to have to factor in, to any long-term plan, is that, you're going to have increased O&M costs, for these systems. But yeah, the media it can be either regenerated, those medias will tend to cost more. And then there's other medias that, or I should say, sorry, the regenerative ones you get will be less expensive, and the ones that are kind of a one-time use are going to be more expensive. So
I just wanted to be sure that we're not sending toxic PFAS back into the ocean.
So, yeah, I guess not from this process, or at least not at a high level. But there is, I think, high likelihood that we already have PFAS in the wastewater stream. So that it's likely, if we were required, we're not, but if we were required to test the effluent, we would likely find PFAS. I don't know at what concentration, but so far DEP and even EPA have not required treatment on the wastewater side, but I wouldn't say that's not possible in the future either.
Great question, man. John, you had a question?
Yes, I did, Steve. Chuck, I think you said earlier in the discussion, I mean, the solutions for this are fairly expensive, like $8-10 million, something like that.
Yeah, so that's what the cost was presented to us.
Right.
Say that that's definitely a planning level cost. So
yeah,
hopefully there'll be some issue, or some ability to offset that, or have bids come in lower in a competitive environment. But yeah.
And you said there are also grants. The state has some sort of a program or monies, because they realize this is expensive, especially for small towns.
Sure.
So
yeah.
my question would be, is this is only, are these grants only available? You have to be exceeding the cutoff, or at least the cutoff that they've got right now, before you'd be considered? I mean,
Yeah, so I've actually asked that question.
But yeah,
I've asked that question. If we're going to be proactive and remove it for whatever reason, but not be over the MCL, would the same grants be available to us that are for the people over the MCL? And the answer is probably, but ask us when the time comes. But also, it matters how much money they have available and how many applications they get. So certainly, if we're ahead of, say there was 50 communities that needed to do treatment, but only 3 of those communities were at a point where they were had hard numbers in hand and were ready to go to construction, theoretically I would think that would be they would be likely to fund our project because we're there. But that's not guaranteed until we get there, you know what I mean? So it's kind of a calculated risk, I guess, to go forward in that way without being over the MCL and knowing up front. And then of course, if there's 24 communities that are ahead of us and they all have $10 million projects and they have $50 million worth of funding, I would find it very hard to believe that they would fund our project when we're not over the MCL.
all right. Well, that was kind of I wondered how the line might get managed, and I don't know that we have a trend line at this point. It's still early in the game, and right now that trend is flat, I think. But if it starts to move, we've got to start thinking about that.
Great. Other questions or comments from the task force? Ron?
Yeah, this Lincoln Street treatment system, what about the treatment system at the water plant? Is this treat all the supply, or just the Lincoln Street supply?
So this was strictly looking at Lincoln Street. So we are, currently under the threshold, by, at Gravelly Pond, we're under 10 parts per trillion at the pond. So I think, not that I have a crystal ball, but the likelihood that they put the MCL at 0 is, I would say fairly unlikely. I could see them lowering the MCL to 10, but we would still be under that at Gravelly Pond theoretically at this point in time. So this study was only for Lincoln Street, but like I said, we're in good shape, or much better shape at Gravelly Pond.
Thank you.
Yeah, that certainly raises the question we need to grapple with down the road about whether it might be worth the time and energy and effort to get some new wells that had significantly lower levels of PFAS, perhaps around Gravelly Pond. Chuck, do you have any evidence from monitoring wells near Gravelly? Are those being tested?
So we decided to test our monitoring wells around the landfill. And it did come back, Nate, I always mess this up. We certainly, if we were using those monitoring wells, if they were a drinking water supply, they would have been over the threshold.
Yeah,
But I think they were in the hundreds.
correct.
That sound right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
So we have it at and it wasn't at every monitoring well. It was only at like a couple locations. But so it was at much higher concentrations than what we see in the pond. So the theory being that, the pond is not under the influence of the groundwater that's around the landfill.
My other question is more global than local, and that is, what in heck do they do with the concentrated PFAS that they've filtered out? How do they dispose of it?
So I don't think the science has really caught up with that question yet. From what I can tell, there are a couple different ways of, basically destroying the molecules, but they're very energy intensive. And so I think what I've seen or heard is that they incinerate it, incinerate the media that has the PFAS, but that doesn't necessarily eliminate the PFAS. So it's basically going in the atmosphere is my understanding. Maybe at a lower concentration, or maybe they have some scrubbers that can, break the bonds, but, basically it's the carbon fluorine bond that just is unbreakable.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's above our pay grade, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not a molecular chemist.
Any other questions or comments about the CDM Smith report? Very
I have a
useful.
question for Chuck.
Sure, Mike.
Yeah, Chuck, great job last night, by the way. Really appreciated your comments. It was great to have you there. On the PFAS issue, if we do have an exceedance, is there a protocol, or we have a standard? Do we need 3 exceedances in a row over a 90-day period that would trigger some type of action? Number one, and then do we have a sense of what our time to ramp up for that action would be? So, for example, do we know it's going to take us another 90 days to get online with some kind of carbon filtration system with a granular activated carbon? Or, how do we plan for that? What I suspect is probably an inevitable situation.
Sure. So the threshold that we're currently working with is that on a quarterly basis, we would need to average above the MCL. So, we are seeing slight fluctuations. If we were, and we're testing monthly. So, in a quarter, we would have theoretically 3 samples, in our case 6, because we're sending our samples to 2 different labs. And so if the average of those 6 were to be above 20, so you could have some above, some below, obviously, but the average would be above 20, then we would be in violation of the MCL. And it would be public outreach and just letting people know. If there were, we could do one of 2 things. We could just decide to shut the well off and go into basically a water ban. There would be no outdoor watering at that point. We would have to, because we would, especially going into the summer season, I would be very nervous that our demand would exceed what Gravelly Pond can produce. So if we wanted to shut the well off, we could, and we would just tell people we're shutting the well off and to conserve water. If we thought that we were getting to a point where, say there was a slight flash drought this summer and, we were only relying on Gravelly Pond and we had to turn Lincoln Street on, there would be a much bigger public outreach campaign to tell people that we have exceeded the MCL and that we are pumping this water into the distribution system, basically to protect public health and I shouldn't say public health, to public safety in terms of fire protection. However, consumption for, these certain sensitive populations is definitely a concern, and people would have to take that into account and, make their decisions for themselves. And then beyond that, it would be up to the town if we wanted to, roll in a trailer mounted, vessel that could potentially treat the PFAS, or, some communities are giving out cases of bottled water. So people have that for drinking and they just use the regular tap water for, other everyday uses. So that would be the type of response that we would have, because as you might have seen in the report, from the time we decide to go forward with the bench pilot scale testing to the time we actually have a constructed, facility online is, roughly 27 months or, at least 2 years. So it's, it's not a quick process to have the permanent solution.
Thanks.
Good. Last round, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Chuck and Nate. Very helpful. The next agenda item is a flyer for the June 11 town meeting. And I think that actually falls also under the update from Group 5, because Group 5, which is charged with citizen awareness and engagement, is aiming to use the June town meeting as something of a launch for increasing awareness, inviting people to take our survey. We had hoped to do that by the April meeting, but due to a variety of intervening events and the usual kind of controlled chaos that precedes town meeting around town hall, we weren't able to. But I am told by reliable sources that there will be subjects on the agenda in June that will probably draw a crowd. So unlike other special town meetings, which get very small attendance, this one may get moderate or large attendance. So it'll be a good venue for us to do that. Sue, is there other, you have other questions or comments about a flyer for the meeting?
So the only thing I wanted to add about it is a little bit about the process associated with trying to get something into town meeting, because it was news to me. So I'm assuming it would be news to several people. So in order for us to give the flyer, get the flyer distributed at town meeting, we need to have Alan Wilson approve it beforehand. So he needs to see, I'm thinking we need to email him whatever gets put together. Once he approves it, then I can go ahead and print it. And I just need to give it to the town clerk's office a couple of days before the town meeting, and they'll make sure it gets distributed. But I hadn't really given it much thought until we were trying to scramble to get something together for the April meeting and realized that that was not going to actually work. So I just, this time around, we just need to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to make sure that we can get something on the table.
Good.
Yeah, this is Tom Keogh. My suggestion is once we think we want to do this, and this could be done tomorrow, I would just include Alan in an email just to kind of get him to start to think about it. He's a very organized moderator, and I think the earlier you let him know, the better it will be. And then you could just say, when we have a draft of this, we will send it to you, but just let him know right off the bat.
Good suggestion.
It's going to come up fast. It's going to come up faster than you think. It's 6 weeks.
Right. Thank you, Tom. That is a good suggestion. Of course, we can include other specifics. So we'll be open to suggestion, at least for the next couple of weeks, about what content to put in that. We're trying to keep it simple, 8.5 by 11, one side if possible, with simple instructions for taking the online survey at the bottom.
And Steve, are we thinking that we would want to, I'm assuming we would like to have everybody vote on the document that's going to go on the table at town hall. So again, I just think we need to keep in mind how often we meet, to Tom's point, we want to make sure that we can have everybody in this group approve what we're going to put out there, and then still have enough time to turn it around and get it on the table.
That's a very good idea. It's a democracy.
Absolutely.
Good.
And Sue Brown has a question.
Please, Sue. Unmute.
Yeah, just a suggestion, actually, just once it gets voted on, and in addition to putting it out at town meeting, posting it on the web, because while we may have lots of people at town meeting, there will be lots more staying home. As riveting as it will be, there'll be lots. So just a suggestion.
That's a good reminder that
Right.
The PR we do for this shouldn't be limited to June 11th. We should utilize the cricket, and maybe even if we have an 8.5 by 11 appealing multicolor page, we should use it as a flyer as well. Excuse me. Can I move to Group 2's update? That's the supply of sources of drinking water, and I know you folks have been working hard on this.
Ashley, were you going to start this off?
Yeah, I can go first. Is it possible for me to share my screen?
I'll make sure of that. Yes, it is now possible for you to share.
Do I have to click on anything?
You have to click the big green button at the bottom and pick a.
Ah, I
share.
see it. Gotcha.
But just by way of context, remember that we're asking for updates once every 6 weeks from each working team, meaning not either every other or every third meeting.
All right, so this presentation quickly will discuss protecting existing and future resources within Manchester. And some threats that we potentially are currently in place are the development at 133 Essex Road. That one is close to Round and Gravelly Ponds. And then the Shingle Place Hill 40B, which is close to the Cedar Swamp Aquifer, and upstream from Lincoln Street Well, and also would impact Sawmill Brook. And then Fred has previously discussed to the group the unique natures of Cape Ann granite. This is a map that Fred pulled together, and you'll see in yellow, these are aquifers which can be found on the Massachusetts mapping. You'll also see here, let me see if my cursor can highlight. This is the outline for the development at 133 Essex Street. And Fred, why don't you give us a few thoughts on the potential impact on our water supply here?
I'd be glad to. Wish I could get my hand on your mouse, but
Tell me where to put it.
maybe you can follow.
Yep.
The purpose of this graphic was really to show the proximity of this development by Country Squire Homes, also called 133 Essex. Its proximity to an aquifer that feeds part of the water to our well. The pork chop shaped hatch in the middle of the Country Squire property is the area that they're going to disturb with blasting and hole ramming, and this is where all the housing will be. And notice how close that is to the aquifer across Chabaco Road. Hard to see the road in this, but the road goes between those two polygons. That aquifer, the one to the east, lies partially in our intake zone of groundwater. It's actually zone 2. And I'm worried about the character of the granite that we have that's very special on Cape Ann being fissured by the disturbance up at Country Squire. What this means that the water or infiltration, because all these developments now use as many pervious surfaces as they can. So that means that the water of the parking areas is going to go straight down, could get into the fissures that are created in the Cape Ann granite because it's very friable. And it could end up in the aquifer and then end up in our round pond wells. The pink area that you see, the large pink, is the influence zone to both wells. And the red heavy line is an outline of the northern part of the surface subbasin. And this is where all the surface water falling from the rain ends up into gravelly pond. But that doesn't affect the ground wells directly, except for those two zones that are outlined in blue. So this shows the risk of this development to our drinking water. Whatever they spill up there over the years, you're going to end up drinking. Just keep that in mind.
Okay, and then we now have a similar potential threat. This is just a simple map from Mass Mapper. It doesn't have Fred's fancy overlay, but this area is the area of development. Here is an aquifer which crosses over both Essex and Manchester, and in the past, it was used as a public water supply, and I'm trying to make the case that we should protect all aquifers in Manchester through bylaws in this presentation. This aquifer is medium yield, which is the same as the Lincoln Street and the ones around Gravelly Pond. So it would be a potential source of water if we would ever need it. Fred, do you have anything to add on this one?
Not really, other than pointing out there are two wells there, one's in Manchester, one's in Essex.
So one's right about here and one is right about here, maybe, roughly?
Yeah, it's a short distance back from Southern Avenue.
Okay, all right, let's go on to the next one. So what are the potential threats to our water supply? Climate change, drought, spills, or contaminations. The PFAS is a great example, which we discussed earlier. So proactively, we would like to protect all of the aquifers. The Cedar Swamp well was tested in the 60s for pumping volume and water quality, and it could be our emergency resource. So we're not talking about trying to get the DEP to permit it or draw down on it or take any extra water from it now. We're just saying, let's protect it so it doesn't get contaminated with development in the future. How do towns protect their aquifers? Some towns have set up aquifer protection overlay districts. So this is separate from the Zone 1 and Zone 2, which is protected in the drinking water regs in the DEP. They have bylaws which talk about any aquifers, and the language that they use is that they're protecting the water for current water supplies into the future and potential water supplies into the future. Wenham, they have a protection overlay district. Weston is a great model if anybody wants to look at their bylaws. They have very detailed discussions on what is limited, what is prohibited. They address everything from wastewater treatment plants to excavation within 6 feet of the water table. They discuss what you would have to do in the case of seeking a waiver and what would not be allowed were any activities that could adversely affect existing or future water supplies. Scott Horsley is also looking into other towns that we could use for reference. Some towns, instead of using an aquifer protection overlay district, they use broader language in their groundwater protection bylaws. So this is the zone 1 and zone 2. If you look at the wording of Manchester's, it talks about protecting existing water supplies into the future, but there are many examples of other towns which talk about protecting existing and future resources within those groundwater protection plans. Looking at our neighbors specifically, Wenham has their aquifer protection plan. You can see this area here that's shaded. They're protecting this whole area. You can see down here, that is where we are, and that is where our aquifers are for Gravelly Pond, and they're not protecting our aquifers. So Hamilton, let me see. I was looking this up very recently. I didn't see anything in their bylaws, but I did see reference in their what is that, the recreation plan, and they noted specifically that they do not cover portions of Gravelly Pond and Round Pond. So they are excluding us, or our area, which I think also would include some of their water. I'm not sure, maybe someone else can speak to that, but they are specifically noting that they do not protect our areas. Essex, they use a water resource protection overlay district, and their wording protects existing and future water supplies. And they specifically mention protection of the Cedar Swamp aquifer. So one area where we could work with our neighbors is within their frameworks, extend their protections to cover aquifers which are sensitive to our watershed. Another part of my tasks on our team was to work with Scott to update his 1990 plan, and we're focusing first on updating our zones 1 and zone 2 and looking at our zone 3. And this would include mapping the groundwater table. So we would be able to hopefully know around the landfill, where are those PFAS moving and what direction? What direction is the groundwater moving all over Manchester, and what areas need either updated, improved protection, and what areas impact our water directly? So another question which was brought up in my research, I think Fred brought this up, are there more aquifers out there which have not been identified? And maybe that's a question that I can ask Scott, but it would be useful if we were to pursue an aquifer protection overlay district to map all of the aquifers in town. And I'm going to have Peter talk about this slide, the Board of Health regulations. Peter?
Good evening, everyone. The Board of Health has pretty definitive direction from the state to protect drinking water. Where we've had problems in the past is our bylaws limit that to existing. So if the upcoming town meeting, for instance, amended it to existing and potential, or future, however you want to word it, that would go a long way to extending our ability to enforce any and all policies. And the state says that we can adapt any policy that is equal to or more stringent than the state's. And the only way that that can be confronted is with an appeal to the Mass Department of Public Health, and in talking to them, they have said nobody ever remembers an appeal overriding a local Board of Health's decision. So there's an opportunity there to protect even presently unknown water sources, just by broadening the bylaw to include future potential, however you want to word that. And then we have a lot more to implement policies to protect the groundwater.
Thanks, Peter. So that brings us to the end, and I'd like to open up discussion with people who are more experienced within the town to discuss, is it reasonable for us to try to adopt and get this aquifer protection overlay district, or to broaden the language to protect future water supplies? How can we go about protecting these other areas, and how can we go about working with other towns to make sure that their protections extend to our sensitive areas within their towns?
First of all, thanks, Ashley and Fred, Ron, Joe, for that update. A lot of thinking and a lot of work behind it. Appreciate it. I would just note that the last time we did a significant modification of bylaw was in the wake of the 1990 Horsley Witten study, establishing the groundwater protection districts. So we have precedent, although it's not recent. Are there other comments or?
Steve, there was one more recent, I think it was 4 years ago. My timing might be off, where the town meeting directed the Board of Health to have septic system reviews and inspections in environmentally sensitive areas of town. And the Board of Health has conducted those reviews on Boardman Ave, Harbor Street, Tux Point, Kettle Cove, Ocean Street, Victoria Road, Summer Street, Raymond Street, and Butler Avenue. So there is a precedent to protect, if
Raising
you
the
will.
bar.
Yeah, and maybe, I don't know how attentive they are at town meeting, but maybe just adding that potential or future water sources to the existing bylaws would be enough to give us the flexibility to make more policies.
Thank you, Peter. Other comments?
Steve, I think maybe one thing we could do is use this flyer that's going to go out at the next town meeting to talk about the possible directions that this group might go, and then use that also as an invitation to come to our first public meeting. Because again, I think the whole idea of getting more people behind the task at hand, rather than having it just being introduced at the town meeting. In other words, people have a chance to sit down, talk about it, discuss it at some type of one of the public meetings that you're going to have for the task force.
My understanding is any policy would have to be voted on at a town meeting, any policy of significance. So just directing the Board of Health to come up with policies to protect future would open the door to allow us to, again, have the public meetings, go through all of that rigmarole, and start the process.
Excellent. Anne, your hand is up.
Thank you, Steve. I have for you a question for Peter Poloso. That was an interesting list of streets. I think none of them are in zone 1, 2, or 3 of our wells. They're all on the shore.
Correct.
So I'm not sure. Yeah, I would be looking, even if we were protecting our current watershed, we would be looking at septic systems on Loading Place Road, possibly Crooked Lane. So how were those streets chosen to be tested?
They were determined to be environmentally sensitive, which is the key, I think. And I'm not suggesting that there's a direct correlation, but perhaps if the Board of Health was directed to identify areas of potential water, drinking water sources, and come up with policies to protect that in environmentally sensitive areas, or not even in environmentally sensitive areas, that would give us the authority to start the process of identifying each source, what the threats, if any, may be, what restrictions should be. You would have to have, obviously all the public meetings, so forth and so on. But I think it would give us more freedom to be proactive in the process.
I understand that including potential sources, but you're not currently investigating any current sources, which seems confusing.
Well, I mean, what we do is we depend on reports from the Department of Public Works.
I suspect, Ann, that those streets were selected for a combination of wetlands, freshwater and saltwater, and FEMA flood zones.
FEMA flood zones, sure, but there's, okay, on Raymond Street, there is a brackish.
A lot of wetland around Raymond and Butler.
Yeah, there's not a lot of wetland that isn't ocean on the Boardman Harbor area.
I think to Ann's point, if I recall, I think that was Adele Irwin had brought that to town meeting, and it was definitely a worry about coastal waters. It wasn't about drinking water for sure, but if that's my recollection of that one.
Thank you.
Ron, you have your hand up too?
I just have some additional slides on regional water sources when we're done with this discussion on Aquifer. Just a
Okay,
short,
let's hear from John first.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I guess it was the first slide that Ashley had put up there with regard to threats. I wouldn't necessarily call this a threat, but maybe on the watch list. I don't know if everyone's aware that Hamilton seems to be planning to pave Chabaco Road. And that was an issue that came before the special town meeting last fall. And they came to us and they wanted to reroute that road probably another 50 to 100 yards further away from Gravelly Pond. It required a 2/3 vote. It was voted down by us, largely because there was a technicality. They didn't have all of the approvals that they needed, and we were the last one. They had to refile something because they didn't file something correctly, and the town felt that we wanted to be the last one to have to review it. However, Hamilton does retain the right to pave the existing road if they so desire. And I don't have the latest information. I asked Greg Federspiel where things stood a few days ago. He was going to try and chase down the Hamilton town manager on that. But he hears that they will pave that. So there will be stormwater runoff from that road. Those of you who've been on that road, it's kind of firm as it stands now, except for the puddles. So maybe there's storm runoff to begin with. And I think they are going to be putting in some swales and things. But it's something to think about. Those of you who've been on Chabaco Road, and I assume just about all of you have, know that at some point it's fairly close to Gravelly Pond. So it might be something to keep an eye on.
Very good point. Ron, do you want to close out the slides?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, Joe, I didn't see your hand. Do you have a comment about what Ashley's presented so far?
Yes, I do.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. In what Ashley has stated and what Fred has stated for future aquifers, while we have 2 select board members on the committee, Ann is with us and also John Round is with us. I realize a town meeting is 6 weeks away, but perhaps where we have a flyer coming out, perhaps we could have John, as yourself, get in front of town meeting and present these future aquifers. That needs to be part of something that should be adopted at town meeting and presented. So I believe that it's very important. It's a very important point that came out of this meeting, and I think we should make the town aware of it. I realize it's you know, a real not a good rate of time to do this now, but if we could accelerate it, I'd be more than happy to help out to get this ready for town meeting and present it to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I'll just warn everybody, a caution that Alan Wilson is justifiably very cautious about announcements and educational segments in town meeting. So I'd expect, actually, I would guarantee that his response would be something along the lines of, if you're going to have a public meeting, why don't you put it in your public meeting? Helen, you had a comment too?
It seems to me that the survey, which you are hoping to get many people to respond to, is the perfect way to raise this issue of what are we trying to protect, you know, existing, potential, on both issues. There's a lot to be said for a more aggressive approach than the town has taken to date. And I think that would provide it the basis for action at a town meeting. Wouldn't be this week or this year, but maybe in the fall even, it would be a time to work on that. That's all.
Excellent idea. Does anyone know, is there a fall town meeting this year?
No.
So far, we are focused on the June 11th meeting and have no idea.
Hard to see through the haze. I understand. Ron, you've been patient. Please enlighten us.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Very clear. Thanks.
Okay. Just part of our task in Team 2 was to just identify regional water sources. And this is just a quick, and Chuck, feel free to jump in. Chuck mainly helped me out with this. So currently the Manchester system is currently connected to Gloucester and Beverly. But I believe, Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, there are different gradients between the systems. So any connections are permitted for emergency. And any permanent connection would require a permit.
Yeah, and that's good, Ron. Yep. And I would just say, you know, usually there's such things as intermunicipal agreements too, when you get into like, you know, permanent connections that, you know, are active.
Yeah, for future considerations, and I guess Chuck's fresh from a meeting with Hamilton. There's a connection being considered to Hamilton with a force main via Chabaco Road. Would be around 3,100 linear feet being considered. And then there's this Essex pressure well, which would need source approval from DEP, and maybe Fred, you can opine on that. But those are future sources. So current regional connections are unlikely of sending water back to Manchester. However, the Salem Beverly may be the possibility. And again, there are talks underway with Hamilton. So
yeah, and I'll just add here, Ron. You know, I did sit down with you know, the folks in Hamilton have a DEP grant to inspect you know, the potential regional sources. And so, you know, we are just one player that they're talking to. They are talking to the likes of, Topsfield, Salem Beverly, perhaps even Ipswich. The issue there is, and when I went there to, talk with them about this, and why Ron's saying, it's unlikely that they're going to send any water back to us is, really all of the Hamilton sources, they're very concerned that all of their wells will be rendered useless, and it could be as little as 10 years or 20 years. They just the I would say it's probably a little bit of everything. It's climate change. It's other issues with emerging contaminants. They have they were actually already installing GAC filters at one of their sources, and I'm not 100% sure how their system operates. I think they have several wells, but they were putting in GAC at those wells even before they thought they would be treating for PFAS, and they're not over the MCL, but they will get that added benefit of treating for PFAS when they install that. The kind of long and the short of it is their wells are being drawn down to a point and not recharging because and so they're very concerned in the short term they could run out of water, and they already have heavy restrictions in summertime and not over withdrawing their sources because they are in the Ipswich basin. So anyway, that's just kind of a feel for where they're at versus where we're at. We might think that we have neighbors that could send us water, but that might not necessarily be true.
Fair point.
That's all I have, Steve, on that.
Thanks, Ron. Any comments on those regional updates, possibilities? I mean, it's pretty clear that the aquifers don't care where we drew the town lines. And so we're going to have to somehow or another address this question of some kind of joint or regional approach to protection, land acquisition, new source development. Can't be just Manchester on our own. I wish we had twice as much water as we need, so we'd have a hand we could deal from. But we're lucky just to have the surplus for our own needs. Jessica, you sent me emails indicating that Team 4 was working on an update for this meeting. Was that the plan, or were you just putting money in the bank for the next meeting?
No, I was just asking some questions. I don't think we're quite ready, but because I didn't think we were on tonight.
Good. Well, I didn't have you on the agenda, but I'm always opportunistic.
Okay. We should have something ready for next time.
Okay. Well, also on the citizen engagement, public awareness side of things, I mentioned to some of you before we got rolling here today that this week is actually Clean Water Week nationally. And it's kind of a big deal in Washington. But interestingly, it's not the only thing of its kind. Here's a more specific program called Drinking Water Week, and that is next week, curiously. This is evidently something that was launched some time ago by the trade association that most treatment plants belong to, the American Water Works Association, which is supply as well as treatment. But obviously has been embraced by the CDC as something that's important, consistent with their mission and whatnot. So I'm not sure what use we can make of this particular week on short notice, but I'm very open to suggestions about it, because it's you can see from this scroll down, it talks about municipal water supplies, well water, private as well as public challenges, and then of course everything the CDC is doing.
So Steve, I'll just bring it up, but so I was the past president of Massachusetts Waterworks Association last year. I'm currently the past president, and I was on the board of directors for several years before that.
Great.
I actually have a press release that we made for Massachusetts Waterworks basically, so, for those that don't know, Massachusetts Water Works is a, nonprofit organization that, it's like a, it's not related, but obviously there's an overlap in the mission between American Water Works Association, then that goes down to New England Water Works Association, and, Mass Water Works is a separate thing, but obviously, share mission and so on and so forth. And it's dedicated to drinking water, tap water, public water suppliers, and the like. And so I'm considering submitting that press release, just saying, hey, everybody, it's Drinking Water Week. And the executive director, who is very good for Mass Water Works, crafted it with input from the board and some other committees that, belong to Mass Water Workers Association. And so I guess I'll just give people a heads up that I'm considering putting in. It's a little, I don't know what the right word is, but I think it will need a preamble because it, is talking a lot about the funding sources that are available, whether it be ARPA funds or BIL funds, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, so on and so forth. So kind of gets a little, heavy on things that people might not be tuned in, but, it's Drinking Water Week. So, we should promote it. So anyway, that's just something that was on my mind.
That's great to know, Chuck. And would you be able to share that with Sue Croft and me so that we could,
sure,
ways we might shamelessly piggyback on your press release?
Yeah. So yeah, I can shoot that over.
Great, thank you. Every little, every little drop counts. Sorry. Ashley, you reminded me that MECT has made some proposals about new regulation at the Board of Health level. And there's probably some significant overlap. There is some significant overlap between those and what you've been talking about here. Can I ask you to be specific about what kind of help would be useful in the next few weeks on that?
So I could start, and then I think Peter can take over. It's my understanding that MECT put in a lot of effort in drafting some guidelines which would help protect drinking water, and it would have the benefit of not being waived in certain state-sponsored development like a 40B. So the thought is, if we can work with the Board of Health, we can set guidelines, standards that can't be waived, that can be more strict than what is already out there under DEP guidelines. It can be at the level where we want them. And it's a pretty dense document. It's great. And I think if we have someone who has legal expertise or political expertise who can help work on this, I just think that it went to the Board of Health, and I think they said, well, this task force is being formed. It seems more appropriate for them to review it and for them to propose it to us rather than MECT. So I think it's been passed into our hands, and Peter has offered to lead it, but he's going to need some help, and I'll let Peter take over from there and correct anything that I may have messed up.
No, you summarized it perfectly. Excuse me. I had met with Chuck, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months ago, Chuck, and we reviewed the proposal. And I believe, please jump in here, Chuck, that many of the proposals required multiple department participation. And we're willing to do that but we, as a Board of Health alone, didn't felt we had the significant influence to encourage the participation of multiple departments. This group obviously does and would. So we're more than willing to go ahead and adopt any or all of those. I've asked Tom and John at our meeting next week to give me some, educate me on a good way to introduce this through the town departments. Chuck's, already participated, so he's pretty much aware of the situation, probably has forgotten the details, he's got so much else on his mind, but I would, encourage him to participate, and an attorney would be wonderful. So Chuck, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so you're right. We did sit down with it. There was a lot going on. There still is a lot going on. I would say that, my reaction, at least at first pass, is, like you said, several of the, of the items are already covered in, various places throughout the bylaw. And so this was basically taking those or, repurposing them, within the Board of Health, which may be a good idea, but I would just say that, right now and Sue Brown can talk about this a lot more than I can, but they're recodifying, Ron too, for that matter, I guess, on the planning board, recodifying all of these bylaws and everything that are just, have been, basically edited, on a whim, it seems like to me, and, with no real rhyme or reason. And this would just be, adding to that chaos when they're trying to fix that chaos in, other areas of the bylaw. And so, I think any, effort to do that, like you said, will take several committees or boards or, departments to make it coherent and make it, not contradict other areas that already exist. And, I would, so, and that, that's not just DPW. I think there's a lot of stuff that was in there for planning and Concom and the like, and it was basically moving them all to Board of Health, which, gives you, I guess, greater, broader authority and, takes it out of, several departments' hands on for a purpose, but it, I think it has unintended consequences that need to be further vetted.
Yeah, and I think it's worth looking into and figuring out how to make it work, just because in discussions with Scott Horsley, he indicated that the Board of Health is what can help protect towns that are holding their water supplies to a higher standard. So I imagine, yes, there's great redundancy, and I don't have the experience to know how best to do it, but I think that we've been advised that it's important that some of these regulations go through the Board of Health. And I think that also speaks to, if we can have our bylaws, even if in the near term we can't create a whole aquifer protection zone, if we can simply change the language of current water supplies to current and future, just a simple change like that, I think that would be more of a catch-all for anything that we could possibly get approved by the Board of Health.
Yeah, actually, this is really useful. I want to make sure we distinguish between things that require a bylaw change, which has to be voted at town meeting, and things that are within the scope of regulations that the Board of Health might promulgate on its own say-so. And I guess I have a question, which, not to put too fine a point on it, but is there some urgency attached to this possibility of strengthening regulations to protect water supply?
Steve, I'm actually not sure about that. I think that would have to go to someone with an expert in the 40B law and how things are grandfathered in or not, or maybe Peter has experience to know that when these regulations come in, if certain things can be grandfathered. That I don't know, but I'm sure that someone could tell us whether there is an urgency or not.
Okay.
The bylaws, any policy by the Board of Health cannot be overridden by 40B or any other state attempt to negate them. Whether that's grandfathered or not, I don't know, hence the need for an attorney to advise us.
That's the big question. I'll see if I'll volunteer as a kind of rusty attorney myself to see if I can phrase that question clearly enough for town council to give us a definitive answer. And I'd be happy also to attend the meeting next week, Peter, with you and Team 5.
It's a 10 o'clock.
Let me liaise with Dan Hill on that, and see if there's something that that he might be thinking about. That he's probably the most talented 40B lawyer in the state, with John Witten, and I'm sure he might have some thoughts that he might be willing to share. So I'm happy to liaise with him and get back with you.
That's perfect, Mike. That was my second suggestion, was whether you could put an oar in the water on this. Okay.
Happy
Does that sound like a plan for figuring out whether we actually have an opportunity with some urgency here? And if not, we can afford to be a little more deliberative and slower. All right, great. Well, thank you again, Team 5. That was very, very useful. We have a couple of shorter agenda items next. The first is, when will we be ready to give an update to the select board, as it shall forever be known, at least until the next town meeting. And for myself, I think we're ready at any point to give an update to the select board, but I would like to have, one round of responses from each of the teams and the survey results in hand, which would suggest the end of June as a earliest opportunity to have something useful and authoritative to say to the select board. What do other people think about that? See a little bit of nodding, no negatives.
Steve, I think it's probably a good idea to give people, 2 or 3 weeks after the town meeting to go to the survey and then be able to look at those results and have a little bit more information. And by that time, as you suggested, you'll have a report from each of the 6 working groups.
Yeah.
July 5th would be a target date, I think, probably the best.
Perfect. That gives us an extra week, which is always helpful. And plenty of time to recover from town meeting. In terms of our own next meeting, I'd propose 2 weeks hence, which is May 12th, Thursday. And I'd throw open the 2 questions of whether 6:30 is preferable to 4 p.m. For folks. And what's the appetite for having some people convene in person? Thoughts?
I think this format is just so convenient for, I'll speak for myself. There's a lot of draws in my time, professionally and personally. And if I don't have to drive someplace or go someplace, and it makes it, this is a very convenient forum for me. And I think for a lot of us that are not quite at that retired standpoint, that have to juggle family obligations and work obligations, being able to phone in is very, very helpful.
Yes, I could not come unless I were able to dial in.
Right. And we're not a small group. We're not 5 or 7 or 9 folks. So meeting around a table is challenging in the first place.
I mean, if people wanted to come and be in person, room 7 could easily seat 10 people.
Mm-hmm. And Sue, I hate to be a skeptic, but have you experienced the hybrid technology?
Yes.
What do you think?
It's different. It's different than being in a room with everybody, and it's different from being on Zoom with everybody, because you got to kind of balance the 2 things. So it takes a little bit of practice, but I think people didn't know how to deal with Zoom when we first had to do that, and everybody adapted, and everybody will adapt as they need to when everybody's ready. but it works. I mean, if you need it to work, it works.
It's possible to share a screen, so it's up on a projector in room 7 and on everybody's Zoom.
If that person is remote, yes.
Okay, that was one of the main missing pieces the last time we tried this. I think Jessica, it was the stream team that
Yeah.
did it, and it was kind of frustrating for the audience.
That is definitely something that people have gotten used to, also to Mike's point, people have gotten used to being able to, take calls in the car and to do all kinds of stuff. And Zoom has provided that ability, just like multiple people being able to share a screen. So it does, Zoom does have its benefits, absolutely. But if people do need to just have a change of scenery, we can totally make that happen.
Okay, anyone want to speak forcefully for a strong preference for in-person?
I was just going to speak, I don't know if we're doing a poll on the time, but I cannot do a 4 o'clock on a Thursday. So if we're talking to 6:30 or 4, I would say 6:30 for a Thursday.
Agreed.
Agreed. Anybody who prefers 6:30?
Yep.
And those who prefer 4? And the remainder of you are, I hope, indifferent. All right. And will May 12th work, or are we running into any religious or school or other kinds of holidays?
That's good for me.
Perfect. So
there's a CPC meeting at that time.
Starts at 6:30, 7.
It starts at 5:30. Maybe it'll be over by then. I don't know. But that's okay.
Good. Well, you got your update under your belt here. Could I ask for 2 of teams 1, 3, or 4 to bring us up to date on May 12th? Team 1, that's demand and uses of water.
So Steve, what have you chosen for time, May 12th?
We choose May 12th at 6:30 to 8 at the outside, Joe.
Okay.
I hear no violent objection from team 1. So we'll assume that will work. And then team 4, will you have
I think we could certainly give some information. I don't know if we'll be able to have PowerPoints or screens, but I think we will certainly, I don't know if Randy has any thoughts on that, but we will just be meeting again on the 11th, I believe we set. So,
Perfect.
But I think we certainly could have some updates for you.
Yeah, we don't need to require PowerPoint, as I said to you last night.
Yeah.
The important point is to have a clear story to tell and let us see where you're moving and what happens next. Good. Jeff, Koshan, if you're still here, is there a hike planned around the watershed?
Yes, Sunday, May 8th, 2 p.m. around Gravelly.
Excellent. It's a
Yeah,
very,
that's Mother's Day, right?
Yep, we have hikes every Sunday, and sometimes moms especially like to come and run away from their families.
yeah, we're going to allow moms on this hike, right? For those of you who haven't taken this hike before, it is one of the prettiest walks in Manchester. Well, it's not actually in Manchester, but it's one of the prettiest walks near us. With the added benefit that you get to see some of the infrastructure and probably in action, because those wells pump into the settling pond and the settling pond overflows into Gravelly and you end up at the treatment plant. So
yeah, so it'll be advertised on Facebook and Cricket and through MECT, and we'll just meet off Pine Street there and go in by the water treatment facility and circumnavigate the pond and come back.
Right. And it will also increase awareness of things like the paving and potential relocation of Tobacco Road and the development nearby, et cetera.
Yeah, you can see a lot of the, potential places where water runs into the pond or out of the pond and high and low levels and things like that.
Yeah, and Joe, if you'll help me with this, I think we should personally invite the hierarchy of Gordon College to feel free to join us.
Yep.
Nice opportunity to get them a little muddy and have some conversation.
Okay.
Okay, so we need finally to vote on the minutes from our April 13 meeting, which I confess I have not read. Have other people read them, and are there changes or additions?
Yes, I move they be accepted as presented.
That's easy. Is there a second?
Second.
Anyone opposed to accepting the minutes as presented? I'll declare that unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that concludes our business unless anyone has anything they've neglected to raise. Speak now. Super. Thank you, and see you, I hope, walking around the pond and then again on the 12th.
Thanks, Steve.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Steve.
By
Thanks.
acclamation. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Good
Steve.
night.
Night.